Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so I'm hoping that you have opened up your assignment. The assignment that I'm talking about is 111, number 3. It is the notes on meiosis. So a quick review. We spent the last few days talking about cell division. We know that cells divide primarily for two reasons. Number one, if they get too big, they place too many demands on the DNA of the cell. And number two, if they get too big, then we know that they have a hard time maintaining homeostasis because they have a hard time getting all of the nutrients in and the waste products out. So the first type of cell division that we talked about was mitosis. Mitosis. And mitosis, we said, makes identical daughter cells to the parent cell. Mitosis results in diploid cells. It results in body cells. It results in somatic cells because mitosis is used for healing and mitosis is used for growth. Well, there is another type of cell division, very, very similar, but not the same. And this cell division is called meiosis. Now, the easy way to remember meiosis and mitosis is that meiosis makes me, right? Because meiosis is the process that we use to divide cells for the purposes of sexual reproduction. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, in your assignment, at the top, this is part A. So, we're starting with the idea of asexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, offspring are produced by only one parent. Each parent will pass along all of its genes to its offspring. Examples of asexual reproduction include budding. So if you have anybody in your family or in your circle of friends who maybe is a gardener, sometimes they will cut a small piece of plant off of another plant and then just go and plant that and it becomes a whole brand new plant. That is asexual reproduction. Bacteria, they literally will just split using cell division, mitosis, and that is how they create their offspring. So again, asexual reproduction is when you reproduce using only one parent. So the parent has to pass down all of its genes to its new formed offspring. Issues or questions? This is number 2 on your notes catcher. So there are some advantages to asexual reproduction, and they're listed here. First of all, it's faster. Asexual reproduction takes about as long as it takes to divide a cell. Cellular division can take anywhere from a couple of minutes to a few hours. So if you are an organism that reproduces asexually, you can make offspring in a few minutes or in a few hours. Number 2, also an advantage for asexual reproduction. Large numbers of offspring are being produced. In the picture, what we see here is a mushroom, and the mushroom is releasing fungal spores. So the fungal spores are what are eventually going to grow into full-size mushrooms. Every time a mushroom does a spore release, it is literally releasing millions of offspring. So that one little mushroom in the picture literally has just made 1 million plus little offspring. So that's a lot. And finally, C, the parent does not have to find a mate, because remember, asexual reproduction is happening with only one parent. So there is no need to go and find a mate. So these are advantages to asexual reproduction. Issues or questions? Number 3 on our note catcher on the first page. So what are the disadvantages to asexual reproduction? First of all, all of our offspring are going to be exactly alike. There is zero variation in the offspring. And this is because, again, the parent is a solo parent. The parent is passing all of its genetic material to all of its offspring, and it's all going to be identical. Okay, so that's great, but why is that a disadvantage? What this means is this organism has no ability to adapt to a changing environment. I shouldn't say they don't have any ability. They have a much reduced ability to react to a changing environment. So when the environment changes very, very quickly, oftentimes we see organisms that reproduce asexually have a very hard time competing and staying alive. If you have something that you need to say, you cannot put it in the chat when I'm sharing my screen. I cannot see the chat when I share my screen. I can see that you put something in the chat. I just can't see what the heck it is, just so that you guys know. All right. So this brings us to sexual reproduction. This is part B on the first page. So, sexual reproduction requires two parents, okay? Each of the parents is going to pass on half of its genes to its offspring. In order to do this, a biological male, and a biological female parent is required. From the biological male, we get the sperm cell, and from the biological female, we get an egg cell. So in order for sexual reproduction to happen, we need to have two parents that of different sexes that is each going to contribute half of the genes. So this should hopefully sound a little familiar. We spent a little bit of time earlier last week talking about haploid cells. And we said something about they have half the genes. Well, now they're coming into play with sexual reproduction. Issues or questions? Again, this is numbers 1 and 2 under B, sexual reproduction, in your note catcher. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what are the disadvantages of sexual reproduction? Well, here they are. First of all, the parent has to find a mate, okay? That requires time, effort, energy. B, very, very few offspring are going to be produced. I want you to consider, for example, a human female. A human female, if she wanted to, could produce one offspring, usually. I mean, yes, there's multiple births and things like that. I get that. But on average, the average human female, if she wanted to, could produce about one baby a year, give or take. Elephants, which you see in the picture, they can produce one calf, one baby, about every 2 years, because like we're humans, we stay pregnant from 9 to 10 months. Elephants will be pregnant for 22 to 23 months. So they can only produce one offspring every 2 years. As a general rule, if you are reproducing sexually, you are going to produce much, much fewer offspring. And lastly, of course, it just takes longer. So you're going to take much longer to produce your offspring, because it's not just growing a cell. You have to grow the cell, and the cell has to grow and develop and become its own unique organism before it can be hatched or born or sprouts or whatever, depending on what kind of organism it is. Questions or issues on the disadvantages of sexual reproduction? All right, so what is the advantage? So if all this is going against sexual reproduction, why bother doing it? Why do we see this in the evolutionary history of life here on Earth? Well, the advantage is you create offspring that are different. This is a litter of puppies from the same two parents. And you can see, even though they're very, very similar, because obviously they're all the same species, They are also unique. Each and every one of these have slightly unique coloring. They're going to be a slightly different size. They will have different temperaments. And if you've ever had puppies, you know this. So why is variation a good thing? Because when the environment changes, you are more likely to have individuals that survive. Period. That's it. Because again, life on Earth is all, like the whole concept of evolution is all pushing towards survival of species. Sexual reproduction allows species to have more genetic variation, which means it has a higher success rate at survival. Questions or issues about the advantages of sexual reproduction? All right, this is number 5. Oops, went too far. This is number 5 in that first part of our notes on page 1, ladies and gentlemen. Sexual reproduction is always going to involve 3 steps. Number 1, you have to have gametes. Remember, or sex cells. Sometimes we call these the haploid cells. You always have to have gametes if you have sexual reproduction. Number 2, you always have to have fertilization. Now, my notes say it is the union of sperm and egg. Of course, if we were talking about a tree, we would say the union of pollen and an ovum. So depending on the species, we might have a different name for the male gamete, which for mammals is sperm. We might have a different name for the female gamete, which for mammals is egg. But again, it doesn't matter what the vocabulary is, fertilization has to take place. The sperm, the male sex cell, and the egg, the female sex cell, have to get together and become fertilized. Finally, step 3 of sexual reproduction is the formation of the zygote. The zygote is a fertilized egg. So once the sperm and the egg become unified, or the pollen and the ovum, again, I don't care what the vocabulary is, it doesn't matter depending on the species. That fertilized egg, when that sperm and egg get together, is referred to as a zygote. It is a single egg that now is again has a full set of chromosomes. Because remember, the gametes, the sex cells, are haploid cells. They only have half of the genetic material. But once you become a zygote, you now have a full set of genetic material because you have literally half from mom, the other half comes from dad. They get together and they make a full set. All right, we are moving on to part 2, cell division and chromosome number. This is near the bottom of the first page. And the top of the second page. So this is going to take us through A, B, C, and D, I think. All right. Part A. If an organism is the result of sexual reproduction, then it is going to have 2 sets of chromosomes. One set comes from mom, or the mother, and the other set comes from the father. Now, I do want to take this moment to remind you that in biology, when we are talking about mom and dad, we are talking about the biological mother and the biological father. I understand that many of us have different family dynamics, but that's not what we're talking about here. In biology, we are always talking about the biological mother, the female that had her egg involved, and the biological father, the male of the species that had his sex cell or his sperm involved. All right. Part B, these 2 sets of chromosomes are called homologous chromosomes. So you can see, looking at this set of chromosomes, that these homologous chromosomes are the same size, they have the same genes in the same locations, they are matchy-matchy pairs. The only difference is maybe mom's genes are for blue eyes and dad's genes are for brown eyes, but they still have a homologous matching pair of chromosomes. Homologous chromosomes, this is part C, are the two copies of each chromosome. Again, one comes from the female parent and one comes from the male parent. This was A, B, and C on cell division chromosome number. Are there any questions for parts A, B, or C in this section of the notes? All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is part D and part E. For example, an adult fruit fly has 8 chromosomes. So we see that here in this picture. We have 2 green ones, 2 blue striped ones, 2 yellow ones, and 2 red striped ones. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 chromosomes. 4 of these chromosomes came from mom. The other 4 came from the male parent. But you'll see that they are matchy-matchy, right? These are, when they match up, these are the set of homologous chromosomes. The chromosomes that match up are homologous to each other. Now, again, homologous chromosomes are going to carry the same genes in the same location, but they might have different expressions of those genes. So again, maybe mom's gene has a trait on there for blue eyes. Dad also has a trait for eye color, but his expression might be brown. Mom might have an expression for hair for curly. Dad also has a expression of a gene for hair texture, but his might be straight. So again, they all have the same types of genes. It's just they have different expressions of those genes. All right, we have a few minutes left. I'm going to cut it short here. We will finish these notes tomorrow.